He's been building champions since hair metal ruled the world. You're listening to the Coach Robb Podcast.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Coach Robb Podcast. That was a new song from Robb. His band's called The Avocados. That's a new track he just dropped. So I hope you guys check that stuff out. It took a pandemic, but we actually have Coach Robb in our studios here in Atlanta, and you've been all over the country. But hey, welcome to Atlanta.
Hey, thank you so much, and love the new studio. Very impressed.
It's a studio, guest room / Airbnb. It's kind of all those things in one.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that.
I should rent this out as an Airbnb studio. That'd be actually a pretty cool thing.
You talk about a niche on Airbnb.
Yeah, go kayaking and horseback riding, golfing,
exactly.
and lay a podcast down. Hey, but welcome. I know you guys have been traveling. You and Michaela have been traveling all over the country. You did one with Whiskey Throttle with David Pingree and Blair. So tell people about those two podcasts.
Yeah, it was great. We left Orlando and got out west. We had a little bit of a deadline to get out west, so you can imagine we had a commitment for both Whiskey Throttle and Main Event Moto, and that was set about 3 months ago. And then, of course, when the virus kicked in, we thought to ourselves, well, getting onto a plane with some recycled air with people we don't know, not taking it as extreme as other people, but we thought, hey, the best way to isolate ourselves is we'll get into a vehicle, we'll eat out of a cooler, and we'll sleep in an air mattress in a vehicle.
Okay.
Hit a couple Airbnbs when we can, but the beautiful part is gone 21 days so far, and we've seen a total of 8 people, including yourself, as of today.
So. Yeah, so it's basically self-isolation on the road. So you guys did it the right way.
Well, we tried to, and I'm very big on if we say we're going to do something, we're going to do it, and if we have to find a creative way to do it. So Michaela's been a trooper because you can imagine from Orlando, by the time we get home, we'll have just over 7,400 miles on the vehicle since we left. We'll get home tonight, so 21 days later.
I believe that my wife loves me, but listen to me drone on for 7,000 miles, that might be hard. Michaela is an angel, obviously, putting up with your dumbass for that long of a journey.
Well, think about what I do for a living. With our clients, we're on the phone usually 7 to 8 hour blocks a day.
Does she just ever slam on the brakes and say, "Shut up"?
I'm sure she wants to. Yes, I'm sure she wants to.
Your voice is like a...
Yeah, after this many years, it's like it is nails on a chalkboard. But the way our business is set up is I have set calls, certain clients, certain days, certain time.
It's perfect because you're literally on the road. This is perfect.
Literally on the road, but poor Michaela sits back there, and fortunately for Netflix and the downloading of that, she's been able to get caught up on all of her movies because she's been busy as well.
And we should have had her on the mic, so I want to get her thing. But my wife and I being quarantined here, our kids are grown and gone. But I'm noticing these things I've never noticed about my wife before, is that one of the things that drives me crazy that I didn't notice before is that she will wait until I get as far out of the room as possible to start a story.
Oh, goodness.
So you're walking out, and it's like, so you have to come back unless you have dog ears where you can hear. So I'm like, what? Okay. So I'll start walking away, and then another story. I'll be back in 3 minutes. So all these different little things, the quirks of your spouses, and you hear about the divorce rates and stuff going up. I'm glad you guys survived the epic Coach Robb, basically the Christmas vacation or the Chevy Chase vacation.
Well, you'll laugh at this because, and I don't want this to sound cynical at all, but Michaela and I were talking about this whole scenario and situation hasn't changed our life at all. We work from home. We share the same office space. Going to Australia for 8 weeks that we did, we were in close proximity. You're obviously in the air for a long period of time. And even Daniel was teasing us. He's like, so how long have you guys been on the road? And we essentially, we got out there as quickly as we could. And he kind of looks at us and he's like, so how you guys doing? And we're like, we're good. And he's like, no, how you really doing? And we're like, no, we're good. And not because she's in the room with us and I can say it, but she's a very good traveler. She's very flexible.
Yes.
She has a good. We're very spontaneous. We're like, hey, let's go run on this trail.
A badass athlete of her own right. So it's not like you're on her coattails as much as
absolutely, yeah. And we, as part of the trip coming back, we stopped and we rode our bikes down to Sedona and back, and it's a little over 2,400 feet of climbing in a 30-mile ride that we did. And I always say to her, I said, think about how many people I can sincerely say I can go ride 2,400 feet, 30 miles. We went for a run. We were up in an area over in the Flagstaff area, and we ran up. And from the Airbnb we were staying at the end of the road is literally where the trail began. So we thought, well, we don't know. We're just going to go off-road running. No exaggeration, within a quarter of a mile, it was a 12% grade. There was a sign that says 12% grade. So we walk our way to the top of that. Now we're at the top of this, i.e. mountain ridge, if you will. And we were told that there was this 2-mile loop that was over in this Buffalo area. So we're running along, and it's beautiful. You've got literally the snow-capped Rocky Mountains right there. And we're running along, and it starts snowing. And Michaela and I are like, is this unbelievable or what? We're from Florida.
Yeah.
I've only seen snow twice, and I've paid both times to go snow skiing.
How'd that go? Because she got to our house today at 66 and said she was cold. So how'd that go with the snow?
Well, the good part is we were already 4 miles into a run, so she was really hot.
Okay, so you already warmed
so she's
up.
warmed, and we did wear the right clothing, and we're out there running. But it was just surreal to be coming back, and it's snowing on us. And then, make a long story short, a couple of days later, we're on a road bike. We're out riding. All of a sudden, we start feeling some rain, and we're in Vail, Colorado at this point. We had made our way from Flagstaff, and so now we're in Vail for 3 days, and we're doing some running and cycling there. And we leave Vail, and we go what they call the west side of Vail, and we're riding along, and all of a sudden it starts snowing. And we're like, to be a Floridian riding in the snow, for some people who hate the snow, I get it.
Yeah.
For us, we're in Florida, we only have
Freaking
2 seasons,
Freaking
hot
out.
and hotter.
Yeah, yeah.
It was just wonderful.
Yeah.
We had plenty of clothes on. And then we talked to our kids back at home, and there's like, it's 87 today, it's 92 tomorrow. And we're like, we're sitting here in 40-degree weather, 30-degree weather, running and cycling in the snow in April. And it's kind of hard to think, like, when we leave you today and we go back home, I mean, it's going to be 92 when we get there.
Ugh.
It's just hard to fathom. And as you and I were teasing about, even at your house, and to see that the seasons definitively change like that, and how cool that is. We love the cooler weather. I don't like cold. I don't like snow. I mean, we don't like to be cold, but kind of over the hot heat. So it's been a great trip. It's hard to imagine almost a month on the road.
Well, I'm glad you guys survived that. You're going to be going home today. But we have a lot of questions. We've been off for a few weeks here with the quarantine, and we talked before the show is that a lot of people, like yourself, are staying on their training habits, their training programs, things like that. But I'd say the majority of people aren't. The wrench has been thrown in, whether they've lost their job, whether they're quarantined, whether they have laws where they can't go out.
Sure.
And I said to you, okay, let's just say average of 1 to 10. Let's just say everybody's a 5 right now. And when the quarantine's over, you can get back. I said, where should you start? So here's a good example of some advice coming from Coach Robb is knowing the spectrum of athletes. Where would you say to people that haven't been able to maintain their workout routine? Let's say maybe 25% of it.
The big thing I would ask you to contemplate is act as if you got injured. And I know, we've got a very diversified database of listeners, but if anyone is listening and has incurred a sport-specific injury, you have no choice but to start to where you can go. We've got Andy Morano, who's dealing with a really severe ankle and foot injury, a lot of tendon damage on the top. Well, he's in a cast from his knee down. Well, even though he's been in a cast, we've been doing core work. His right foot was damaged, so we've been doing all of his work on his left leg. We've been doing balance drills. We've been doing core. We've been doing upper body. Now, this unfortunately was before the virus. But to your point, there's only so much he could do. Mm-hmm. We kind of create a paradigm shift and say, let's do what we can do. Let's not focus on what we can't do. In Andy's situation, when he does come back, the beautiful part is the only thing we have to rehab is from the knee down. Mm-hmm. We've talked about this on the show, but the calf muscle is actually a pump for the lymphatic fluid. That's what keeps your feet from looking like Fred Flintstone. Mm-hmm. So when that calf is, in his case, the whole ankle is in a cast, the calf can't activate. Well, his toes start to look like Vienna sausages. Yeah. So what we always say is elevate the foot, squeeze the toes, manual massage them, treat the foot the best you can, but work the rest of the body. And that's the way I feel with the virus.
So the quarantine's an injury, basically.
That's exactly it. And we've all been forced to address it, deal with it. Some of us were able to. handle it a little bit differently. Maybe you already had an arsenal of stretch cords and dumbbells and a Concept 2 rower and a ski erg and a bike and a trainer and a treadmill. Because I don't know about you, but a lot of the people I spoke with, they went to go buy that. And of course, it got scarfed up.
Sure.
Rogue was behind. Heck, even Amazon was saying they were 2 weeks behind getting stuff out versus the overnight. So I always look at it this way. Let's not focus on what we couldn't do. Focus on what you could do. And I'm not trying to be the eternal optimist, but it isn't going to do you any good to get pissed off on what you can't change.
Yeah.
But when you do start to resume, let's say the gym's open back up, do everything you can not to go in the gym and smash yourself. One of the things, and I do not want anybody to think I'm being a smart aleck when I say this, but I've said it now on the last 3 podcasts we've done. I think it's awfully ironic that we've taken this pandemic to capture people's attention on the importance of a strong immune system.
Yeah.
I mean, anyone that's been a follower of you and I since day one with 40 plus podcasts, we always say you've got to focus on recovery. The definition of overtraining is simply doing more than you can absorb. Well, being able to absorb is those 4 quadrants that you alluded to. You've got to find that finite balance between personal, professional, financial, and athletic. Well, yes, you make that mental commitment that you want to be fitter, but then if you're an accountant and it's tax season, it's probably not a good time to be going to the gym and really pushing the envelope.
Right.
People coming out of this pandemic is exact same thing. You've been forced. There's been limitations, not anything you can do about it. When you do start to resume, act as if you're starting at ground zero. If you've been able to stay somewhat consistent in any format, just use that as the foundation, and just use that as a springboard from there. Versus, as you said, if you're going on a scale of 1 to 10, if your fitness is at a 3, don't resume at an 8 or a 9. You're just going to, ironically, break yourself down, suppress your immune system, and make yourself sick. And I don't want to get hung up on the virus is going to get you. We've always said if
but you don't want to compromise immune system now.
Ever.
But now even more so.
And that's where I don't want to sound like I'm being sarcastic with it. Yeah. If you've gone back and listened to the 40 previous podcasts, this isn't a new subject matter that we've discussed.
Yeah, the way you prepare before, during, and after pandemic is the same way you should be doing it the entire time. It's not anything different. To maintain your health, mental well-being, all that stuff helps you maintain an equilibrium with your health, mental, physical, and that way you're less susceptible to flus, to everything.
Everything.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes hand and it absolutely goes hand in hand. When somebody eats a lot of processed fast foods, simple sugars, that is a nutrient robbing food plan. And I don't want anybody who may be new to the podcast go, man, he's just on a soapbox. No. I don't live in a glass house. If you listen to our other podcasts, it's pretty clear. But when you understand that eating things that are bright white, think about a hamburger bun, white bread, French fries, that literally will rob the body of nutrients. And now you've got a bone that's brittle, particularly soda. A lot of people don't realize that soda will actually pull calcium out of the bone and make the bones brittle. So if you've got a diet that's literally robbing the body of nutrients from the inside out, then you have lack of cardiovascular and a strength fitness program, and then you wonder why the virus was able to catch so many people off guard. Again, I'm not a doctor here, but a lot of the things that I've heard about is, whether the media embellished it or not, it is what it is. The virus is attacking our young. We thought that, and we knew that anybody with a respiratory issue or anybody elderly,
underlying,
absolutely. But then they're like, oh, but what about the young kids? And I'm like, hello, look at the garbage we feed them. And, if you look at the consumption of junk food, if you look at the lack of physical activity, i.e. Xboxes and all these other video games, are we really going to step back and be surprised? And we have 3 children. I'm not, again, I don't live in a glass house, but I'm very big on, are we really surprised that the kids are getting something that they thought would only attack the elderly, when you recognize our kids don't have an immune system that's much stronger than the elderly? Yeah. That's a shame.
Yeah, that's pretty scary. And like you said, it is different in maintaining, being active and maintaining a healthy eating lifestyle. That's something that we all strive for at all times. Before, during, but this really exposes, when we don't, it exposes those weaknesses probably exponentially.
Well, and if anybody listens to our show in the past, what is it I'm keen on? Accountability, responsibility.
Yeah.
And again, if you're new, I'm not an elitist. I'm not on a soapbox. It's just, I always believe that the behavior today has to emulate what the desirable goals are. When we're looking at addressing someone's frustration, why can't I get faster? Why can't I get leaner? Why can't I get healthier? What's standing between where you're at and where you want to be? Just like the podcast we did, that goals don't really work or matter, because if I'm dealing with an athletic environment, the consensus is always the same. I want to be the best. I want to be number one. I want to be a champion, whatever that description is. We understand that. Why aren't you? It's those frustrations that I keep chronically getting hurt. I keep overtraining and making myself sick, et cetera, et cetera. Those are frustrations. Those aren't goals. And that's why I don't want a new listener to go, man, this guy's a little condescending. No.
Go back and listen to our other podcasts. We've covered all of these things. I guess what I want to get out before we get into our other topic is that the worst thing you can do is try to make up for 3 or 4 or 5 weeks in isolation. You're not going to, and you could actually do more harm than good. And I guess that's what I want to get across to people. Is this is coming from Coach Robb, is you're not going to make it up. You can't make it up. No. So go slow, stay smart, and avoid injury and avoid compromising your immune system.
I like the fact that you hit the word injury, because if you go, let's use your scale of a 1 to a 10 and you're at a 3 and you go to a 6 or a 7, the tendency to tear a tendon, a ligament, or a muscle goes up incrementally.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're already frustrated because you couldn't exercise as much as you're used to, keep that in mind, because without sounding rhetorical, the 2 things that will set you back will be an injury or an illness.
Yes.
Isn't it ironic? Exactly what we're talking about. And that I understand everybody's really excited to get back to the routine. That's great. If we've learned anything, I hope it's err on the side of caution, because you've heard me say I'd always want a client coming into the starting line 1% undertrained versus 1% overtrained, whether it's mental resiliency or whatever.
Okay, good deal. All right, our next topic, I have 2 daughters, so this is kind of hits home for me, is you had a girl, Jackie Riess from Snowbike Girls, contact you about specific things that has to do with females and training. And this to me is pretty cool, because going through all of these questions, she had, I guess, put up an Instagram or Facebook post and had all these questions, there is a lot of unknowns. People just, they're like myself, ignorant to some of the physiological stuff and things like that. And I'm glad we're covering this, because there are differences between the male and female bodies. We all have the same muscles and things, but there's definitely some differences.
Yeah, there's definitely differences. And the way that it has to be approached, I think, is what I'm looking forward to discussing today, because there's a lot of convoluted information, strength, flexibility, nutrition, as if the women have to do it differently. In some areas they do, but in a lot of areas they don't. And then you get into the marketing, and, I think if anything else, it creates more frustrations. It's like, is it right or is it wrong? Is it good or is it bad? Whether it's nutrition or even an exercise. And that's what we hope to clear the air today.
And you can apply this. This is obviously snow bikes, which is basically a dirt bike with a snowmobile paddle on the back. But you can apply this to whatever you're doing between men and female, differences in training. And I guess a good place to start is what is, or how does the difference in strength between men and women influence riding, and how can we compensate? That's kind of, to me, is like the light bulb moment of these people. They're thinking, how do we have to compensate to ride at this level, or to increase our speed, things like that. So let's start there.
Well, and without sounding sexist, because again, Michaela's in the room here, I want everybody to understand, just genetically, most women are born physically weaker than somebody of the male species of the same height and the same size.
Yeah.
And I want that to be really understood. We're talking about comparable. I'm not saying take a 6-foot guy and compare it against a 5-foot woman. Obviously, there's going to be strength differences, but if you take a 5-foot to a 5-foot, a 6-foot to a 6-foot, the women just physically don't have as much inborn strength. I don't know if that's correct English or not, and that's not a sexist statement. That's not putting them down. It's when we saw here with these questions that came in, the frustrations are real. Hey, I'm trying to ride, in this case, a snow bike. I'm trying to ride enduro. I'm trying to ride off-road. I'm trying to ride moto. Well, if we look at what we're riding, a 200-pound plus bike, once we get to that 250 or above, the pushing and the pulling of a bike that weighs 200 pounds, without trying to sound cynical, that is a lot of power. That's a lot of strength.
You can't go around that.
You cannot avoid it. And not to change the subject, but even when we're dealing with young children that ride the 85s, when you've got 85s that are as powerful as the 125s you and I grew up with, we have to take a look at this and go, okay, the landscape has changed. As you know, we work with Logan Best with Factory Yamaha and Triangle Yamaha. And even though we're not putting him on a load-bearing program that we have with Seth Hammaker with Cowie, we have to recognize that he's riding an 85 with a lot of velocity, hitting things at high rate of speed, trying to move a gyroscope known as a motorcycle around. If we take that from a youth and we take that into female youth, all the way up to female adults, the number one thing I want the women to understand is you've got to get physically strong. And I understand the biggest feedback I get is, but I don't want to look all man. I don't want to be all manly looking. I don't want to look like Arnold. Well, you're exactly right. And anybody that's listening to this podcast, whether they're as part of the group or they're not, please hit us up. contact@coachrob.com. I'd be more than happy to share with you our functional strength exercises, but it is the absolute foundation, because without getting into a bunch of physiological terminology, physical strength is the ability to move something one time. We measure it in load. I don't care if it's in pounds or kilos, whatever your measurement device is. What we want you to be able to do is have the strength to lift more load, then do it multiple times, muscular endurance.
Yeah.
Whether that's to do a 5-lap sprint on a motocross track, or whether it's to do a 3-hour GNCC, it's still the same. The only thing that changes is the number. It's still the same concept.
Right.
The difficult part is we think that the physiology doesn't really matter in training until we go try and race it.
Let me ask you this, and not to sidetrack you, because we didn't even talk about this before, but you and Michaela do tries, and we talk about a dirt bike weighing 250 pounds.
Yes.
What about a road bike? She's not throwing around a heavier bike than you. So if it's not specific to motocross, let's just say it's a soccer tit for tat, where it's
sure.
What about training for that? Would they be more closely identical of a training program?
No, sir.
Okay.
And the reason being is what we have to look at is the sport specificity. Your daughters grew up playing soccer. Any of our listeners that are in a speed or agility, okay? So that ability to accelerate, decelerate, pivot, and reaccelerate. Doesn't matter if you're on a basketball court, tennis court, whatever you're playing, that ability to explode and then decelerate, control the ball, then reaccelerate, and then to do that for 2 quarters, 3 quarters, 4 quarters, no matter what the duration of that quarter is. Muscular endurance, muscular power. When we go to somebody like Michaela, any endurance athletes, whether they're runners, mountain bikers, cyclists, whatever that may be, you look at the demands of that. Obviously, being from Florida, we don't have to work on a strength to weight ratio to get her up 3,000 feet of climbing, but we do have Florida winds, so she has to still generate power. She has to offset that. What's different is we measure it in a 60-mile ride, averaging 10-mile-an-hour headwinds coming down by the beach, versus this past week when we were in Sedona, 2,000, 3,000 feet of climbing in 30 miles. If you look at, and for the listeners who cycle with wattage, when you start looking at how many watts per kilogram she generates, I can draw a parallel between her size, her speed, riding in the wind versus riding in the hills. It's still load and it's still muscular endurance. Exactly
but if there was a guy, her stature, her size, what would be the difference in how you train him?
Nothing.
Okay, that was my question.
I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah. So that's my point. So if
I've got a 5-foot guy and he's training for triathlon, the specificity of that is still triathlon specific.
Yeah.
The difference is with all of our clients, we always start with baseline assessments. Not to sound sexist, but if I do a 10-mile time trial on a bike, I have to use that female's numbers on wattage, time, average and max heart rate. I'm not comparing it to the guy. I'm just saying if I were to compare the results, very rarely will there be parity between the two.
Understood.
But the specificity of how to improve load, i.e. strength, endurance, lactate threshold, is exactly the same.
And getting back to the consensus of these questions, I want to get that point across to the girls listening, is there are no differences in the bodies. The muscles are different. I mean, the size, things, but how you train is the only thing different. Is that if we're talking about bikes, dirt bikes, which are heavy, which you can't get around that hurdle. But if it's just a matter of training on a road bike or girls, you have all the stuff the guys have.
Absolutely.
And so you can. I mean, I know that there's differences in the muscles as far as size, things like that. But this is all about the same.
I'm glad you said that, because the physiology. If you look at a deltoid, a male and a female have the exact same deltoids. They have the same pecs, the same biceps, the abs, lower body. And I think a lot of people don't understand that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a legitimate question. The difference is the men make it look easy is what I hear from the females all the time. we can't go as fast as them. They make it look easy. Well, remember, what are you starting with? It's kind of like me trying to race an 85 against an old KX 500. I've got less power.
Yeah.
I've got to build that up. And that's, excuse me, that's the analogy I want people to understand.
Okay.
Is you've got to build the base, but without using a big physiological term, sport specificity has to be understood. I say this over and over and over again, and this isn't a dig on anybody who doesn't ride moto, but if I take a female that rides moto, she damn sure can go ride a road bike, but I can't take any traditional road cyclists and put them on a motorcycle.
Right, exactly.
That's what I think is pretty amazing about motocross and off-road, because the demands associated with that are like nothing we've ever seen anywhere else. And that's why I love the fact that, Jackie hit us up and is like, all right, I work with this large group of women. We have a lot of questions. We have a lot of frustrations. And I'm like, this is awesome, because we've been obviously consolidating questions for a couple of years now. And I thought, well, what a great time to bring it out. Everybody's coming out of this situation that we're in, lots of frustrations. They want to resume. So I thought it was a great time to kind of shed some light on that difference.
All right. Well, Anna Backlund has a question about diet, because we talk about diet pregame and game time, and she's a little bit frustrated with all the variables out there in nutrition and what we can do. So can you give her some insight on basically, something either leading up to the race, the day of the race, and during the race?
You bring up a really good point. When it comes to the lead up before the race, it should just be what you normally eat every day.
Yeah.
And I can't emphasize that enough. You've heard me say this when we've been on the show together. I get hit up before a big race, whether it's Loretta's or Ironman or whatever, and people will say, hey, can you put together a nutrition and a hydration plan? No. And they get offended. And I'm like, I need 6, 8, 10 weeks of information.
Yeah.
I don't know what your perspiration rate is. So I would be completely irresponsible to say, oh, here's your hydration strategy. So when we're looking at proper hydration pre-game, just do your normal everyday hydration. For the new listeners, everyday nutrition is half your body weight in ounces of water.
Yep.
You take your body weight in pounds, divide it by 2, and that's how many ounces you need to consume over an 8 to 10 hour period. That's just for basal metabolic needs. But when it comes to you riding a motorcycle for X period of time at X intensity, at X temperature, you're a heavy sweater. The perspiration rate for you at 90 degrees is different than somebody else.
Right.
I would be completely irresponsible to give you a cookie cutter recipe for, you've got to know what it is. But what I want the listener to understand, excuse me, is that perspiration rate is dictated on your personal characteristics. Everybody has a different perspiration rate. Now, taking it a step further, when we're looking at nutrition leading up, it's pretty simple. Walk in your grocery store, shop the perimeter of the store, and make every meal and snack source a fruit, a vegetable, and a lean source of protein. There you go. Eat that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. When you get ready to go to your race on Saturday morning, simply eat what you did Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
Yeah.
Now, I completely understand. People say, oh, I struggle with nerves. I understand. Train yourself. You've got to train yourself, because without sounding, again, arrogant or condescending, I don't want somebody to go, well, I get nervous, so I throw up in my helmet. I understand that. But it's kind of like saying you want to go race a motocross race or an off-road race, but I just really don't feel like picking up that 5 gallons of fuel. I just really don't feel like doing it. It makes me nervous. I'm afraid I'm going to spill gas on the bike. So I'm just not going to do it. But go have a good race. Hopefully the bike will run.
Without gas, yeah.
Without gas. And people go, that's an absurd illustration. Well, what makes you think that the human body can run on the lack of fuel? You've only got about 80 minutes to 90 minutes, depending on body size, of stored sugar in the body. After that, you're bonking. Your blood sugar is gone. Yeah, you can tap into a little bit of stored body fat. Your body can convert a little bit of protein, i.e. muscle, to fuel. But that's not the most efficient form of fuel.
Yeah.
Where we need to tap into stored. So going to the question about what should I do before? Eat what you do all the time. The morning of the race, the magical number is you want to give yourself a minimum of 2, preferably 3 hours from your breakfast to the starting line. That gives you time to digest, absorb, and purge. Then as you go to the starting line, just be milking an isotonic drink. That's nothing more than simple carbohydrates with some electrolytes. I have a product called Energy Fuel. It's made with raw sugar cane, and it has electrolytes for that exact reason. All we're doing is literally topping off the glycogen reserves in the muscle and the liver before the gate drops, no matter how long the race is. because I want your blood sugar levels to be stabilized so your eye-hand coordination and the processing speed is optimized. So that's the easiest way to describe. What do I do before? What you do every day. Morning of, what you normally do. Just give yourself a 3-hour gap. And then once that race begins, especially for the off-road riders, you need to be getting calories in you. After that first hour, you can go ahead and start introducing fluids that have calories in it, i.e. a sports drink, and try to hit about every 15 to 20 minutes, maxing out your calorie intake at about 250 to 300 calories per hour. Again, I use that. It's a very big range. You got to test it and make sure it doesn't cause any GI distress. That's going to be very important, is to test it.
And Maddie Jo Taylor has another nutrition question, because we talked about this on your other podcast, and I recommend anybody that's new, that's listening from this group, go back. We have a catalog of all this stuff that are very specific to these questions. But she talks about not having the time or the discipline to shop well for herself. Doesn't eat a lot of unhealthy foods, but it's not a pattern or a habit yet to shop healthy. Give me some examples of that.
Well, she brings up a good point. It goes back to what we said earlier. Her frustration isn't the lack of effort or desire, because she just said that she's doing it.
Yeah.
The biggest challenge is you got to get to where the frustration is stemming from. So in this case, what I find is people don't have time in their schedule. And without sounding arrogant again, you can't manage time. You can only manage yourself. So what I ask my clients to do is go to the grocery store 3 times a week. Go Sunday and you buy and cook what you need for Monday, Tuesday.
Right.
Because it's fresh. Go Wednesday, cook. And when I say cook, overcook enough volume for dinner tonight so you can use it as a reheat for lunch tomorrow.
So you're only cooking one time. Yeah.
That's right. But you get 2 meals out of it. Hit that on Monday, hit that on Wednesday, and then try to do it again on Friday to kind of bridge into the weekend, especially when we're going racing. I know the question is, I'm frustrated because I don't have the food. The source of the problem is you didn't have the time to buy the food, because her headspace is already there.
Yeah.
I'm already broken myself of fast food. We just have to change your daily schedule.
Okay. Amy Dahl has an interesting question. And going back to the thing, the original one that said, are there any strengths other than physical that women can capitalize on to become more competitive? And I think this question going into from Amy Dahl has that, is the greatest struggle for me is keeping that head game in check and going through the mistakes, failures, and crashes, and learning and growth, as hard as it is to see at the moment. And to me, you can overcome a lot by being more mentally strong than your competition. So address that.
Well, in the comment that was just put right there, the mistakes and the failures. I have a real hard time with that word failure, because to me, the only definition of failure is never trying. To me, if there is no such thing as failure. Now, we can all learn from quote unquote our mistakes, but I think it's very important, particularly for females when we deal with athletics. And I'm going to kind of sound like we're in a Psych 101 class here for a few minutes. A lot of the issues that the women have, if they've been told, you'll never be an athlete. Your brother's an athlete, you'll never be an athlete. Your sister's a better athlete than you. You're the bookworm. You're all these titles that we get.
Yeah.
When you look at those comments, I always like to give the analogy. If I go over to a piece of wood, or I go to a fence post and I nail 100 nails in it, I can pull those 100 nails out, but I still have 100 holes in that wood. I can't take that damage and that scar out. And I hope that really resonates with the women who think to themselves, why am I so hard on myself? I always tease about the little canary on the shoulder. Well, the reason why you feel that way is because somebody said something. I don't know when, boyfriend, dad, brother. And we think, it's just words, toughen up, suck it up, buttercup. I found that it's some pretty deep-rooted issues, which then leads to this idea, well, I didn't win the race, so I failed. I made X amount of mistakes, so I failed. No, failing is not giving it a shot. Failing is letting fear keeping you from even trying. Now, with that being said, that's kind of a segue to what we said early on. Let's get focused on the source of the frustration, not focusing on calling it a mistake. And you bring up something about, being able to mentally focus, keeping my head in the game. I can tell you as a physiologist, 99% of the time, that's low blood sugar. Add on top of that, somebody that's worked a 12-hour shift, drove all night to get to the races, that's already tired. Again, I go back to the children. When our kids were young and they were tired and they were hungry, we didn't scoop them up and go, hey, let's go to the theme parks.
Yeah.
I've used that illustration with you numerous times. When people are hungry and they're tired when they're children, we give them food and we give them a nap. What do? We go, hey, let's go racing. And then we don't have that mental resiliency, or we make silly mistakes, or we don't have that energy to pick that bike up after we've dropped it for the nth time. And we go, oh, I had a crappy race. Now you kind of didn't bring
And the thing is too, is the preparation, even back in schoolwork, it's like, how am I get more confidence for a speech or whatever? It's the preparation that gives you the confidence in that. So if on race day, you're lacking confidence, or you're lacking the competitive drive because you have all of these thoughts in your head, it's by preparing that you get rid of those. The only way to do that is to prepare better, and knowing you're going into that race that it's going to be your day.
100%. And what makes racing so difficult is, like, I wrote a sports psychology book, and the idea behind the book is we tend to focus on the failure. We look at things completely backwards. With yourself being military background, you're whatever division the listeners are in. Let's take Air Force, for example. The Air Force doesn't wait until you go out and demolish a $700 million plane to go, okay, now that you've wrecked it, let's explain how we could have kept that from happening.
Right.
When you put that in the realm of athletics, yes, we all have to go through the school of hard knocks. We have to learn what it feels like having our legs burned standing up, sitting down, and blisters and all that goes with it. But the idea here is my responsibility as a physiologist at a psychological level. Anybody that's listening right now, and I've used it all month long, don't think about a pink cow with black spots. I've said that in every single podcast I've done this month. We've talked about it on the show before. As soon as the brain hears the word don't, it does the exact opposite.
Mm-hmm.
So don't fall. All your brain thinks about is fall. This is why when we pick the bike up and we're pissed, we go back to riding the way we're capable, because the fear of falling has now manifested itself, and now you're not focusing on it, you're pissed. So I want the listener to think about that. You've gone from the fear of falling to now you fell. The fear is now removed, and now you're just focused on the job. That's why I try to educate and train my clients, focus on the execution of the desirable outcome. We said earlier, behavior has to match outcome. Well, what's the blueprint between where you're at and where you want to be? That has to be practiced. Anybody who doesn't know German probably hasn't been taught German. Somebody who can't speak French probably hasn't been taught French. But yet we put ourselves into a competitive environment and go, oh, I don't know why I'm not a champion. We've never been trained to be a champion.
Right.
You've never been taught how to think like a champion. And for the people who race motocross, think about it comes together, and I get the whole shot, and I'm leading Loretta's coming out of the woods, and I know I've got 41 bikes chasing me down, and nobody's ever prepared the athlete. You don't think there's going to be a mental meltdown?
That's a failure. Yeah, setting yourself for failure.
And when they go backwards, excuse me, then it goes back to, oh, I failed. I failed and went backwards. No, your performance program failed to essentially prepare you for what you trained to do.
Right.
You trained to get the whole shot. You burned up how many clutch baskets?
Right.
And then you get the whole shot, and then you're surprised when you get there.
Yeah.
So I always say my responsibility is to get the body where it needs to be, but always make sure the brain's ready to embrace it. So without sounding like a textbook cliche, training is 90% physical, 10 mental. Racing is 90 mental, 10 physical. But we don't ever train the brain. I don't say ever, but very rarely. Or what I have seen, and we pick up, Michaela hears these conversations quite a bit, we pick up a lot of breadcrumbs where people have hired a professional psychologist, nutritionalist, strength and conditioning coach, massage therapist, stretching coach, not understanding the demands of sport specificity, whether it's motocross, baseball, soccer, mountain bikes, triathlons, it doesn't matter. You can change the way people think, but putting them in that sport specific scenario, that's why I wrote a sports psychology book.
Yeah.
That's why we have nutrition programs specifically for that. Now we backdoor that and say, okay, you trained properly for the demands of your sport. Do we have your head in the right headspace to take it? And are we complementing it with a body that's rested, well-fed, and hydrated? Now we have crystal clear, clarity. Boom, there you go.
Yeah. And I guess it's interesting to me is that we talk about difference between men and women. I guess the similarity between the mental side of it for men and women is the exact same thing. So this is where you can pick up an advantage, because the next two questions illustrate that. Is Casey Pryor from New Jersey says, I want to go faster, but my brain won't let me. And I think we've all been there. So
well, and not to sound redundant based on what we just said, and that's a great question. A lot of people don't realize, I refer to this as the glass ceiling of speed. You've gotten yourself acclimated to a certain speed. Let's just throw it into a miles per hour. Let's say that you've gotten acclimated. You can come into that corner at 25 miles an hour. Well, why can't you go in at 27? What people don't realize is it's your brain's ability to process the higher rates of speed. When we're dealing with riders on the track, they come over a jump. And I've seen this happen 5,000 times. We gear down in the air, so when we land, the bike decelerates, and we don't even recognize that we're controlling the entrance speed of the corner because our brains want to process entering that corner in second gear. I'm not advocating this. I'm using it only as an illustration. If you want to challenge this concept, don't downshift in the air, land, and hammer that throttle for 1 second and see if you can manage, keep going straight, but see if you can manage the processing of the entry speed because you haven't downshifted, because we get into gear inches and other physics. But that's exactly what the question was just posed. How do I break that process? My brain won't go faster. You've got to train it. Now, the way that we do that is nutrition. I don't ever want an athlete going to the racetrack, and obviously in this particular subject, we're talking about motocross, or even, on the snow bikes. I want you to come to every session well-fed, so you have a stabilized blood sugar, well-hydrated so the muscles can contract the way they're supposed to. And I always say mentally focused. If your frustration is increasing processing speed, then go to the track and focus on increasing processing speed. How do you do that? You have to go faster. Do it safely, but you have to go faster. If you and I are throwing a baseball back and forth, this is my favorite illustration. If you're throwing a baseball back and forth and you and I are throwing it at 40 miles an hour and a professional baseball player grabs the exact same baseball, we both have the same glove on, and he or she whips that thing at us at 100 miles an hour, it's still the same ball and glove, but our ability to process that 3 times faster, there's where we struggle. So I want... that question is very, very legit.
Very poignant.
Get below the surface as to what's behind it.
All right, one last question on the mental side is Anastasia Kadrashova from Russia says, I'm very nervous before the start. How do I deal with the emotions? And I always say that everybody's nervous before a start. I mean, how do you manage that? How do you, what doesn't encompass the day?
Well, I agree with you. Everybody should be nervous on the start. If you don't, you're going to get bit. The day that you're not nervous on the start of something, you've lost respect.
The passion's gone.
And I don't care if that's a triathlon sprint distance up to an Ironman that's an 8-hour plus event, or whether you're doing a 4-lap sprint or you're doing a 3-hour enduro. If you're not up there and you recognize this is pretty adrenaline driven and this is awesome, you get complacent and you're not nervous.
How can you take that and make it your advantage? How can you take that feeling that normally is associated with a negative thing and make it like to pump you up?
That's the key. I think I don't want her to think that her being somewhat, by definition, nervous is a bad thing. But I do understand the other side of it, that the nervousness can cause you to make silly mistakes. Gate drops and you're still sitting there, because you're just paralyzed in fear. That's where I want to go with this. I love the fact that she's nervous because there's respect. But in regards to where your brain is at, this is the difference between left brain and right brain. Left brain is pulling clutch, put it in gear, load the bike up, watch for the gate. That's all left brain. If I sit here and I ask you to think about, close your eyes, visualize walking your bike from pre-staging to the starting line. Doesn't matter if it's off-road, whatever the sport is. Close your eyes and visualize yourself walking up there. As you do that, imagine it's from a drone. So I want all the listeners, close your eyes if you're not driving a car. Close your eyes. Visualize pushing your bike from the truck to the staging to the starting line. I want you to visualize yourself doing a sight lap, coming back in. Now, open your eyes. Everything that you just visualized comes from the right side of the brain, which is creative. We watch YouTube. We watch live TV. We have a historical memory because of what we saw. So what you've got to do is, and I have all my clients practice this on a daily basis, when you put yourself to sleep, visualize how you want to win the next race. You're not going to know every single nuance in line because you're going to learn that, but that's why practice days are important. Sight laps are important, but when you come off of a sight lap, you need to then sit back immediately. Even if you're at Loretta's and you get that one sight lap and you got 30 seconds. Get to that starting line, close your eyes, and in fast forward mode, where's your line's going to be? If you get that whole shot, where are you going? My point in that is, as you visualize that, you're engaging the right brain. The right brain reaction time is phenomenal. It's extremely fast. To your point, how do you make it an advantage? Control it, redirect it, and recognize, and I say this is stop thinking. when you yourself as a pilot, you know the worst thing that can happen is when someone overthinks it. You guys rehearse it, and you obviously have sim now that you didn't have when you know, as maybe the sims have always been there, but not as extensive and sophisticated as they are today. But what is it? Simulation, repetition. We, you know, my dad was a military guy, so I'm always fascinated with military tactics. But, you know, when they went in to go get Osama bin Laden, it wasn't time to think. It was like, this is the blueprint. This is where we think he's at. When you go in, you're going this way. It was all premeditated. Yeah. Well, premeditate your success.
What about a pre-shot like routine for golfers? And if you look at some of the professional motocross guys, like a Ken Roxon or Adam Seenstra, they do the craziest, like embarrassing little things on the starting line. To like, and for me, that is a good habit. If you get into something where you're doing it the same every time, if you feel that, it's kind of like a safe space. Is that something?
No, it's huge. If you notice Tiger Woods when he's at the driving range, and we've discussed this on the show previously. If you watch Tiger Woods, when he's at the driving range, he always opens his hand, replaces the club, regrips both both hands, hits the ball, pulls the next ball open, opens his hand, repositions.
That's his thing.
It's repetition, to your point. And I always say, especially for the young amateurs, I see people practicing starts, they just roll in the gate and they jump the clutch. Like you said, if you're rubbing your hands, if you're licking your palms like J-Mart does, whatever that crazy routine is, you need to do it every time because of muscle memory. It goes back to your body will do what repetition you taught it. So if you do it 5 different ways at 5 different times, your body's like, which one do you want to choose? Yeah. This is why you see that accidental success. Mm-hmm. This is why you see somebody accidentally gets a hole shot, never gets one and just puts one together at Loretta's and has never been mentally prepared. They've always been a 15th place person. And they're content there. And they can, Mike LaRocco style, start mid-pack, go through. Yep. That's what I'm familiar with. Yep. He does it. But all of a sudden he gets the whole shot. The one time that he did, he's like, what am I doing with my hands here? Yeah. You know? So to your point, I think those pre-race routines is more about repetition. That's what you're familiar with. Yeah. But what you're doing is you're sending a message to the brain, all right, it's go time. Yeah. Exactly like we did in practice. It doesn't matter there's 41 other bikes on the gate. There really doesn't matter. Yeah. When you take something like the Olympics, you've only got the chance to do that every 4 years.
God, talk about pressure.
And that's where it's interesting because when
the demons come from. Yeah.
Well, when I've got a professional motocross racer, we've got 17 rounds. If you blow this weekend, you've got next weekend. When we have an athlete getting ready for the Olympics, when we talk about mental preparation, I don't want to say it this way, but you don't get a second chance. You may not make the team in 4 years from now. Yeah. There's a lot of what ifs in 4 years, much less in 6 days. And what I mean is, Saturday night to Saturday night, I guess that'd be 7, but that preparation in those 6 days versus, 3 years, 364 days to get it again. And and I love to study this, I've been privileged to be at the Olympic Training Center as an athlete and get behind the scenes. And one of the things that I took away from a psychological standpoint was the number one frustration was the guys and the girls that said, I had no idea what to expect. Mm-hmm. Where I'm very fortunate, I went to high school with a guy by the name of Hunter Kemper, who's made 4 Olympic teams for the sport of triathlon. And like you said, words can't even begin to describe how difficult your first Olympics are because you've never been to an Olympics before. And then to have that fortunate chance to go back. But if you look at the people who are devastated, what will they say? I mentally cracked. I shouldn't say never, but I very rarely have heard somebody say, I just didn't perform physically on race day. Yeah. Usually it's had a mental meltdown, had a brain, all these negative connotations. But yet again, we go back to the race is 90% mental, but we don't practice it. So the simple question that she proposed there is so significant, and it really becomes the component that gets overlooked, but yet is the number one thing that frustrates people because they're like, I was in great shape, bike ran great, but I just had a mental head day.
I can tell you what, if I lost by 1,000th of a second, I would be on a mountaintop sitting there with a Forrest Gump beer, just like trying not to jump.
What in the world happened?
I'm like, how do you absorb that and go on knowing that it's going to take 4 more years if all those things fall into place? I mean, that's a different level of mental fortitude.
Absolutely. And it's frustrating for me because people go, oh, Rob, that's your living, that's your soapbox, that's what you live on. No regrets. Every single day is an opportunity to get 1% better. Every single workout. I don't care if you can only have enough time to go out and grab your dog and go for a 30-minute run and you really want to do 45. be happy with the 30 because it is a building block that you have no idea in your future when you will lean on that.
Yeah.
If you go back to the Sydney Olympics, in the sport of triathlon, you had a big group came out of the swim together. You had a couple of groups broke up on the bike. And then you had a large group. I don't know the exact number. I'm going to call it a dozen runners. You have 6.2 miles to get 3 spots with a dozen runners. That is not the place to be thinking, I wish I was a little more dedicated to blank.
Right,
My nutrition, my sleep, my hydration. I wish I had done just a little more
The
speed
accountability
work.
comes in. Yeah.
That's where I don't want people to think
Or start tripping people.
That's right. And I don't want to be the guy that sounds like I'm on a soapbox. I hold myself accountable because I never know. You know, Michaela and I, when we went to Australia, we went on this hike and we got ourselves into a little bit of a predicament because the bushwhack wasn't really there. When we turned around to come back, we lost the trail. We couldn't find the trail. Mm-hmm. It literally like disappeared. So we had to do some strategical things. My point was, it was almost 800 feet of climbing on some real jagged rock, and we started to lose sunset. Mm-hmm. We're like, okay. On the way out, we'd already come across a pack of wild boar. So we're like, all right, we know there's animals out here. We're on top of this mountain. We don't really know where we're at, and we're in a state park, and we're about 400K in a car. My point is, there's not a lot of cars and people around.
Yeah, you about made a Dateline NBC.
Well, and you want to be thankful that you're female strong enough because we're like we're against time.
I got to hump it.
We got to get out of here, and we literally had to physically run down when we finally found the trail to try to beat the sunlight because we didn't know what you never know. Like with that Olympics, it literally came down to a 4-man race for 3 spots with less than a mile to go.
Wow.
Do you want to be in that position going, I know he's going to out sprint me. I should have done more speed work.
Right.
I wish I was a little bit more powerful and shook him on the bike. Mm-hmm. But now you got 4 spots. What is my point? Regret.
Yeah.
Don't have regret.
Give it all. I want to get back to Jackie's original thing, and we'll finish up with this. Is the differences between the men and the women? There are some, and when you encompass a dirt bike in that, we talk about this. There are some things. There was one question here about the whoops and being strong enough to do that. Let's get back to the original question of, okay, I am on a dirt bike. Yep. I'm going to do this. I'm on a snow bike. I'm on one of these things. Give them some strength. I know you said if they contact you, you will give them a weight and strength program. But just give them, for an overall insight to this, what can they do for those, maybe just a couple for like the whoops and for the strength of holding and gripping the bike? Well,
I'm glad the subject of the whoops came up because when we teach our performance camps, the one thing I want people to understand is that motorcycle is a moving gyroscope in a 3-dimensional plane. All of us get on that bike and we stand on those pegs and we have left peg and right peg. So there's the left and the right side of the bike.
Yep.
We look at squeezing the bike with our knees. So we're now riding above and below the seat / tank shrouds. And then you look at what's going on in front of the pegs and what's going behind the pegs. So there's your 3-dimensional plane. Your strength program, whether you're a triathlete, you work in a 3-dimensional plane. Yeah. If you're a mountain biker, you work in a 3-dimensional plane. If you're a baseball player, soccer player, karate, I don't care what you do.
Yeah.
The human body works in a 3-dimensional plane. This is why I liked your question that you said earlier. The sport specificity, whether we're chasing a tennis ball or whether we're chasing a soccer ball, riding a mountain bike or chasing motocross, you're still working in a 3-dimensional plane, but the specificity is where it changes. I'm only carrying a tennis racket. I'm not trying to redirect a 250-pound dirt bike at speed.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, everybody, irregardless of your sport of choice, physical activity, think about your human body in a 3-dimensional plane. We've got to work the left and the right side of the body, the front and the back, the top and the bottom, particularly when you're dealing with injuries. Because what happens when you get injured? We talked about Andy. Andy's foot's in a cast, atrophy, the shrinking of the calf. It's inevitable. There's nothing he can do about it. The calf is essentially encapsulated. It's not moving. It's going to shrink. Well, when it shrinks, it loses power.
Yeah.
When it shrinks, it loses flexibility. So to your original question that you just said there, first and foremost, think about your strength. And I hate to use this word functional because it's been adulterated right now. Think about the functional strength specific to what you're asking the body to do. Again, I don't want to sound like I'm a prima donna here. Going to the gym and doing a boatload of single muscle, isolated muscle exercises is completely counterintuitive to the success of a 3-dimensional plane and movement. What good is it for you to stand there and do a bicep curl when you don't use one muscle when you ride a motorcycle.
Right.
Let's stay up to the specificity of the question. If we're talking about motocross, talking about riding a snow bike, if you're looking at why would you stand there and do one single muscle? Why not walk forward in a lunge, do a series of walking lunges, and then do a shoulder press? Walking lunges and a bicep curl, a walking lunge and what we call Frankensteins, where you bring them out in front of your arms are parallel to work your deltoids. I want you to visualize I'm doing a walking lunge across the room. I've broken the three-dimensional plane of front and back, lower body-wise. Now I take my arms out to the side. Now I've broken the three-dimensional plane on the left and the right. So now my core is activated, my legs are activated, my upper body is activated, proprioceptive balance is activated. That's all happening on the motorcycle at various speeds,
right,
65 to 450 Pro Plus. The difference is going to be the ability to process the power, counterbalance it, strength and load, do it numerous times, muscular endurance, and do it with a foundation of what? Being well rested, well fed, well hydrated, and focused. And why do I always throw in the word focused? If I have very, very small legs, so for example, with all of our clients, we start them, every single client, irregardless, we always start with measurements. Because what I'm looking for is muscle symmetry. If you've broken your right femur,
Like my right calf, I've shattered my ankles. I talk about this.
Yeah.
And the I have flexibility. My right ankle is probably a third of what so I have that. That's an ongoing issue. And whether you talk to a doctor or whatever, that imbalance, your body does not like that.
That's right. Well, and that's where we talk about muscle symmetry.
Yeah.
So my point is, if you broke your right ankle and that right calf is a third of the left, when you're running, you're always going to toe off on the left. When we're looking at a motorcycle, if you broke, let's just say the right femur, you're going to intuitively put more load on the left peg without realizing it until you hit a whoop. And now all of a sudden you're left dominant on the bike. You've thrown the counterbalance of the frame off.
Yeah.
It's a gyroscope. It's going to respond to input. You have more load on the left. You're going to try to correct it with a handful of throttle. All you're going to do is get side swapped.
Yeah.
Well, with each one, it just gets faster and more brutal. Not realizing that you can identify that with a tape measure.
Yeah.
That one quad is an inch or two thicker than the other. My point is when it comes to functional strength, the word focused, if my right leg is a quarter of an inch smaller than my left leg, I need to do more on my right leg.
Yeah.
Why continue to strengthen the one that's already a power hog? Get balance.
Because you're going to get bigger at the same time. It's just going to be this imbalance.
The imbalance is just going to stay continuum. And then we get back to the source of the frustration. Not the frustration. The source of the frustration is you didn't realize that you've got a muscular imbalance, which we can identify through tape measurements. We can do it through functional assessments. And I don't mean to be using a bunch of physiological terms, but what is the frustration? I struggle through whoops. Have you ever had any issues with your hips? Yeah. With the knee braces, you hear me say all the time, the energy's just going north. The boots got the ankle, knee braces have the knees. So we're seeing a lot more scar tissue in the hip flexors. So we're seeing a lot more dabbing of the foot. So now you're throwing kerosene on a fire. People are dabbing their foot because they have more scar tissue, which means they lose the mobility of their hip. They're dabbing more, getting more scar tissue.
Yeah.
Then you do a functional assessment, the strength between the quads, the front, and the hamstrings in the back. All of a sudden there's a strength imbalance. The quads and the hamstrings are fighting against the hip joint. So that's another reason why you can't keep your leg up in the corner.
Yeah.
So you dab it. You get this compounding effect. What have you got? You've got scar tissue that's literally jamming up your hips, and you don't even know what's causing it, and you haven't identified it, and you're working with a riding coach, and they go, you suck in left-hand turns.
Continue to do the same thing. Yeah.
Which goes back to her point of, I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated. So when we look at the subject of strength, think about it in a three-dimensional plane, irregardless of sport. When you're a female, recognize that you're not as physically as strong as a counterpart at the same size, same body composition. Not that they're using it as a crutch. I know it's frustrating, but stay focused on you. If you start January and we do a strength assessment, and there's a multitude of ways that we do it, but we do that strength assessment and we create ratios and we create strength to weight ratio numbers. If you're up by 3%, be happy that you yourself is up 3%. Now, the cool part is for the listeners, they'll definitely be better in their sport. I can always show you that 3% improvement in muscle mass, it will result in faster times. Whatever your time is, bike time trial, run time trial, swim time trial, moto time trial, doesn't matter. when we deal with a lot of professional tennis players, we have a series of assessments that we do where we literally time them from baseline to service line back, corner to corner, back to net. That's the playground. That's the landscape they work in. That's one of my biggest frustrations is a lot of times these professional and even the top amateurs, they'll go to a quote unquote performance coach and the evaluation criteria is some clinical thing that's completely
outside
unrelated.
of the sport. Yeah.
It's completely unrelated. You've got to be able to serve a ball. If McEnroe puts it at the net, you got to go get it. And then if Michael Chang, I'm showing my age here.
I was just gonna say, dude, what use some damn people in this freaking decade?
I don't know anybody of the new ones. That's the problem,
Gosh,
But if
watch it, Bjorn Borg and
exactly, But if they put
Steffi Graf,
if they put it in the back, you got to be able to go from the net to the back. And if they go from right to left, especially with the way they're doing it now, but I want that question to be answered. It's 3-dimensional plane, male, female, and when it's female specific, find your identified weaknesses. Guys are the worst, but nobody likes to be told they're not strong at something. They're not good at something.
Yeah.
Well, your biggest opportunity for improvement is going to be identify it, address it. That's why I use the word focus.
Yeah.
Come in realizing this is what's holding you back. I want the listeners to think about this. If competition is important to you, you need to realize that your competition is beating you at your weakness.
Yeah.
Go back to moto. If I'm known to be a great starter and I know I'm going to be good for 3 of let's say it's a 20 lap, let's call it a pro race. If my history shows that I get a good start and I always fade after 3, my competition is just waiting for me to throw anchor and come back.
Yeah.
All of a sudden I man up and I say, you know what? I'm tired of going backwards. So I'm going to do the stuff I don't like. I'm going to do the longer bike rides. I'm going to do the longer Concept 2 ski erg and rowers. But now I've changed the way the game is going to be played because you're racing me, waiting me to throw anchor. And you're like, oh man,
what if you done? Yeah.
I'm at lap 6 and he's still up
Yeah.
there. Oh wait, I'm at lap 10. Shit, the race is half over. Why is he not coming back to me? Well, the reason why I'm not coming back is because I've eliminated my weakness. Now you have to change the way you're going to race me.
Yeah.
Historically, you just waited till I threw anchor and then you went by me. Doesn't matter if you use a Lessie.
Yeah.
You mean you got Blake Baggett knowing the guy comes on hard the second half. I want the listeners to understand that is not accidental. That is trained.
Yeah.
You don't think
it's adapting. You have to adapt.
You have to adapt, but you have to race with a strategy, but you have to train. And I say this all the time. Your testing should emulate your training. Your racing should emulate your testing. I would say 90% of our listeners don't test. Yeah. And if they do test, they're being tested the wrong way.
Outside the scope of how it would be effective.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's not that I know everything. I'm just saying challenge what you're doing. I'm not saying that I know everything, but it breaks my heart. And I've shared this before. When people come to me and parents have invested in facilities and nutritionalists and this, that, and the next thing, and they're mad that they go to Loretta's and the child has a meltdown, can't handle the heat, can't handle the pressure, rides like a complete spode, and then you find out they have no hydration strategy, they don't have a nutrition strategy,
just winging it.
They have no mental skills, they're physically not ready for the demands of the race.
I'd be surprised if he did well.
Exactly. and that's where, to me, I look at it and I go, no wonder why there's these frustrations. Yeah. So going back to like they were saying there, for the females, just recognize that you have to train in a 3-dimensional plane. And if you're really good at endurance, focus more on strength. If you're good on strengths, but focus more on endurance. But I will say, for the most part, women need to get stronger. And I hope they'll really embrace that. And like I said, we're happy to send them some strength programs.
All right. Well, Jackie Riess, I hope that answers a lot of your questions and some of your friends that jumped in there too as well. Good luck on the snowbike stuff. And Coach Robb, how can they get a hold of you to get a strength program?
Yes. Please hit us up at contact@coachrob.com. We'll be just in the subject line, let us know what your frustration is. If you want to speed up that process, you can go to coachrob.com, find your sport of choice. There you'll find all of our different websites. And when you go there, each one of those websites have a plethora of resources, articles, videos. If you go over to YouTube, Coach Robb Beams, you go to the playlist, you'll find a lot of the sports that are there. You'll find stuff like concept videos, the use of ice for contrast therapy, ice cups, why you should or shouldn't stretch, things that I like to challenge the way people think and the way they approach their own success. And, you can follow us on Instagram. It's at Coach Robb Beams, or if you find our websites, just for convenience, the name of our websites are the same Instagram handle. So at Complete Racing Solutions is where you'll find us on the moto side of things.
And what about your supplements, your nutritional supplements, which are the
Yep.
Freaking high grade.
Yep. We our nutrition line is called Nutritionally Green. That's the website. You can go to nutritionallygreen.com. All of our products are pharmaceutical grade. You can only get these at physicians' offices, and we've been able to get access to these and make them available to our listeners. We're very fortunate for that. It's the highest. We have a third-party tester to make sure the efficacy, what we say is in it, is actually in there.
Yeah.
We make sure that there's no fillers, there's no colors. But I do want to go on public record as saying I don't promote supplements. What I always say is after we identify you're not eating enough fruits, vegetables, and lean protein because you're burning it so fast, that's when we look at supplementation. If you keep, you can't consume enough high quality fats, please look at our fish oil.
Yeah.
If you find you can't get enough calories, we have 3 books on Amazon, so you can look us up, Coach Robb Beans. We have a snack book, a smoothie book, and a meal book. We're not trying to peddle books. They're very inexpensive. They're there to give you guidance and insight. It's to give you some insight of what to go buy at the grocery store and then convert it to a meal. My point is, if you find that you're burning 7,000 calories a day, which that may surprise some of the listeners, but those are realistic numbers, you find that you're not getting enough calories, then take a look at our smoothies. Yeah. And when you look at the smoothies, if you're looking for high quality whey protein or a vegan based, we have it.
Yeah.
But I want you to know when you buy it, you're going to get the best quality. And again, I'm not peddling supplements. I just want to change people's perspective on supplements. So,
and that's the whole thing is it's not a replacement.
It is not, hence the word supplementation.
Yes, exactly.
And again, I don't want that to sound arrogant.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so Coach Robb, guys, and again, Jackie, this is a good example of reaching out and what Coach Robb will do for his listeners. This is awesome. And you basically, I'm glad you finished up your world tour, your nationwide tour here at our studios in Atlanta. Safe travels back. And again, with the quarantine stuff, guys, we all want you to be healthy. We want you to come out of this healthy with a new renewed sense of goals when we come through this. But come out slow. Come out where you're not going to injure yourself or hurt your immune system. And girls, I hope that helped you guys as well. And Coach Robb, I guess we'll be back in a week or two.
You got it. Thank you so much as always.
Peace.
Peace out.